QSO Today episode 424, Lee Finkel, KY7M. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, makers of the finest amateur radios and accessories for your ham radio station, and by Nuts and Bolts Magazine. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, amateur call sign 4Z1UG, where I demonstrate the diversity and relevance of the amateur radio hobby and its impact on society by interviewing ham radio operators, many of whom played vital roles in shaping our technology through the amateur radio hobby. And while many people might say, ham radio, do people still do that? This podcast demonstrates through in-depth interviews just how amazing, diverse, and dynamic the amateur radio hobby continues to be. Lee Finkel, KY7M, honed his operating skills passing CW messages for the National Traffic System in the 60s. His membership in the Central Arizona DX Association after moving to Phoenix from Chicago led KY7M to an interest in DX, expeditions to West Africa, and contesting. Lee is now a trustee of the NA7TB, Milt Jensen N5IA Memorial Station, which operates a remotely controlled top band station into an 8-circle antenna from the Arizona desert. KY7M is my QSO today. KY7M, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Lee?
I'm here. You're 5x9.
Lee, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
It started with my first cousin, Art, who was about 10 years older than me, working at Allied Radio in Chicago. And he brought an Allied catalog, which had night kits in it, to me. And I saw this Spanmaster shortwave radio kit that interested me. I was probably about 13 or 14 years old at that point. And my neighbor across the street, Scott, was also interested. So the two of us had ordered these night kits, built the Spanmaster. I think mine worked and his didn't. But in any event, I started listening to shortwave broadcasts. I had put up some kind of an antenna on the roof. We were living in a 3-story apartment building in Chicago, not that far from Lake Michigan. And I think my father helped me put up that first antenna. Listened to broadcasts and then started listening to some of the hams in the area. And about the same time, I transitioned from being in the stamp club at Lane Tech High School to the radio club. Also was introduced to a friend of the family, a son of one of my father's friends, who was K9 George Bernard Shaw, K9 GBS, Phil Horwitz. And Phil was blind, and Helicrafters had designed some beautiful equipment for him. He had a wonderful station. And I started studying the code with some encouragement from Phil, and he eventually gave me my novice test back in 1962. And I got my first call sign, WN9EBT. So that's kind of the initial involvement. The electronics or electric shop, Lane Tech was a combination vocational high school and college prep. And so you had to take shop courses as part of the curriculum. And electric shop was also where there was a radio station, ham radio station, W9WKR. The school club had its own call sign and station. And after getting my license, I got to do some operating there during study periods, which was kind of fun. And then spent time on 20 meters talking to some of the guys in the area. And eventually, after getting my general license in 63, got very involved in traffic nets, and that's where my CW skills started to take off. So let me stop there, see if you have any questions about where we've gone so far.
Sure, and the traffic nets that you were in, was that like the National Traffic Net?
Yes, NTS, National Traffic System. We had the Illinois ILN, was the Illinois CW net, which participated with 9RN, the 9th Regional Net. I was good enough that I ended up being net control, I think, for both of them at one point or another through high school. It actually led me to my first contesting because as a an official relay station, an ORS, you were able to participate in the what ARRL sponsored as the CD parties, the communications department parties, where everyone who had an appointment, ORS official bulletin station, section managers would get on a couple times a year for these CD parties. And so I did that and then got into my first sweepstakes not too long after that.
What was the first rig?
I started with an KY7M, which was factory built. I didn't build that myself. And a Holocrafters SX140 receiver. We had Newark Electronics in town as well as Allied Radio, and I think Newark is where I got the equipment. One of my first discoveries that I wasn't going to be an electrical engineer was when I wanted to get an outboard VFO for the 720 and picked up a Heathkit VFO instead of getting the ICO VFO. And so I built the kit, and it had the same kind of octal plug, I think, that went into the back of the 720. Unfortunately, the way the pins were set up didn't match what you were supposed to use. I think I blew up that VFO when I first plugged it in, and I don't remember how I eventually got things working, but I did get a working VFO. And then after I got my General, I got the plate modulator that went with the 720. So we're living in the apartment building, and I get going on AM. And in the mornings before high school, I knew that you could work into Australia and the Pacific. So I'd get up at, like 6 a.m., and I'd be calling CQDX on 40 meters phone. And after doing that for a week or two, a letter came in the mail from the FCC, not just from the FCC, but from the office of Newton Minow, who was the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. Very unusual. Scared the heck out of me. And reading the letter, it said that his daughter and son-in-law lived in an apartment building a couple away from mine, and that they were hearing me on my radio, and could I please contact them to discuss this interference. Well, it turned out they had a newborn baby, and they had an intercom wired between their bedroom and the baby's bedroom that was parallel to my 40-meter dipole. And so I was inducting perfect CQs into their bedroom.
Waking them, no doubt.
Waking them. And we agreed that I wouldn't do that anymore. But the happy ending to the story is that they needed a babysitter, and I ended up babysitting for them a few times as part of the dispute, my earliest dispute resolution that became part of my career later on.
Well, babysitting was a way for me to buy a lot of amateur radio gear when I was a teenager. I guess it paid relatively well for the time.
So I graduated from that original setup to a Heathkit Marauder transmitter, which my father was very concerned about because it was a $300 kit, which back in those days was a lot of money. And I'd saved the money from working at he owned a men's clothing store in Uptown in Chicago. And so I'd be working there and saved up the money. And so I bought it with my savings, built the kit, and I had to neutralize the two 6146 finals in it. And, of course, they give you instructions about how not to electrocute yourself. But somehow I managed to get my screwdriver in the wrong place, and my folks heard a yelp as I knocked myself to the floor before I finished neutralizing the finals. But it was a great transmitter. I wore out the phenolic gear that tuned the VFO in it several times. Had to replace it, but started working a lot of DX. Had fun with that, and a Drake 2B was the receiver that went with that. So it was a very nice station. The other memory is my father agreed that I could get a better antenna, so I bought a TA-33 Junior, a Mosley, which was a real hot item in those days, and he got permission from our landlady to put it up on the roof, replacing the wire antenna I had up there, and got a piece of pipe from the hardware store that went up the side of the chimney. It looks like a 10-foot chimney up there on the roof, and got it bolted on there, and then held that TA-33 Junior and plopped it into the rotator, and I had myself one heck of a DX station at a pretty young age.
Those were different days, weren't they, in terms of the cooperation of the neighbors?
Well, yes and no. The neighbors, I heard from a few of the neighbors about getting into. I had one of the neighbors on just down the hall from us was big into stereo, and so I created a few problems, which is why I stuck to CW mostly.
It wouldn't be obvious where it was coming from? And at this point, I think when you got your first license, you were maybe transitioning from junior high school to high school, or was this school took you all the way to 12th grade?
It was a 4-year high school.
Did ham radio play a part then in the choices that you made for your education and career? Were you that smitten?
It did, but not in the way you would expect. My family and relatives all thought I was going to be an electrical engineer, but the electric shop there also had an electronics lab course that they got from DeVry Institute, which was, I think, started in Chicago. When I almost failed that, I realized that electronic theory was not my forte. What I did discover is that I like being on the other side of the microphone, and so that led me to University of Illinois and majoring in radio TV in the College of Communications there, taking journalism courses and broadcast courses. So that's kind of the evolution that started a career that then took me on to law school.
At the University of Illinois, were you a disc jockey or on the air there?
They had a closed-circuit WPGU station that ran through the wiring in the dorms. So I did news and sports on WPGU, and then once or twice I got gigs on WILL, which was the official University of Illinois radio station. I was trackside at a state track meet is the one memory I have from that. But yeah, so I did some broadcasting there, and of course we did some videos that were part of the curriculum. What
happened after that when you left university?
Well, when I left university, I'd also earned a commission in the Army, and this is right at the peak of the Vietnam War. So choices were to take a delay from active duty to go to grad school, and I was able to get into law school at the Ohio State University, and so spent the next 3 years there before doing any active duty in the Army. So that's the progression. The one good thing is, while I was at University of Illinois, I really did not do much at all in the way of ham radio. The electrical engineers built a nice radio station. It was actually in the dorms where I was living, but I never got involved with it. I probably would have flunked out. I had enough trouble with academics that first year, so it was a good thing that I let the radio go and really focused more on intramural sports and some of the other things that I enjoyed doing.
Do you have any memories from Ohio State University? As I recall, Ohio State was quite active in those days.
I'm not sure what you mean by quite active. They beat up on the University of Illinois football team when they came for homecoming. I remember that. In terms of a radio station, no, I wasn't involved at all with ham radio at Ohio State.
I recall the anti-war movement at Ohio State was quite active.
It was, and in fact, I was on a professional floor of a dormitory near the law school that first year, and we had the Army Reserves, National Guard formed a perimeter around this huge university grounds. We had tear gas wafting up during some of the protests up to our floor. As a law student, I actually got involved, I think, with legal aid at one point in maybe representing some of the protesters, but those are very vague memories at this point.
And now this message from ICOM America. Heard it, worked it, logged it. This summer, keep your competitive contesting edge with ICOM. Our high-powered base stations cut through pile-ups, letting you work the bands and log those contacts. Contest from the comfort of your home or remotely with the RSBA1 app. The ICOM IC7851 gives you a new window into the RF world, and its on-air excellence is unparalleled. With faster processors, high input gain, high display resolution, and a cleaner signal, it's truly the pinnacle of HF perfection. Features include dual receivers, digital IF filters, memory keyer, digital voice recorder, high-resolution spectrum waterfall display, enhanced PC connectivity, and an SD memory card slot. The ICOM IC7610 is the SDR every ham wants. This high-performance SDR can pick out faint signals in the presence of stronger adjacent signals. The ICOM IC7610 is a direct sampling software-defined radio that has changed the world's definition of an SDR transceiver. Its features include RF direct sampling system, 110 dB RMDR, independent dual receiver, and dual digicell. Create your own band openings with the ICOM IC9700. This transceiver brings direct sampling to the UHF-VHF weak signal world. This all-mode transceiver is loaded with innovative features that are sure to keep you busy that include faster processors, higher input gain, higher display resolution, and a cleaner signal. This has become the new de facto standard as a baseband rig for microwave operation as well. Features include 4.3-inch touchscreen color TFT LCD, real-time high-speed spectrum scope and waterfall display, smooth satellite operation with 99 satellite channels, dual watch operation, and full duplex operation in satellite mode. The ICOM IC7300 is a high-performance innovative HF transceiver with a compact design that will far exceed expectations. This innovative HF transceiver digitizes RF before various receiver stages, reducing inherent noise in different IF stages. The IC7300 changed the way entry-level HF is designed. It is the go-to rig in my station now, and I love it. Features include RF direct sampling, 15 discrete bandpass filters, large 4.3-inch color touchscreen, real-time spectrum scope, and an SD memory card slot. Just know that you'll be very pleased with one of these fine rigs to enhance your contest, DX, and general ham radio operation in your station. Be sure to check out these ICOM rigs and their full line of base stations and portable radios at an amateur radio dealer near you. And when you make that purchase of a fine ICOM rig, be sure to tell your dealer that you heard about it here on the QSO Today podcast. And now back to our QSO Today. Did you end up serving after law school? Did you end up going in as reserves?
I was Signal Corps, so I went to Signal Officer Basic down at Fort Gordon, Georgia, and when I got back home, the reserve units were all full in the Chicago area. That was the extent of my active duty.
So you went to the Signal Corps school?
Yes.
And what did that entail?
How to manage communications equipment for the Army, for the infantry, and how their systems worked. I think it was 2 or 3 months of school that I went through.
Was your amateur radio experience helpful in that case?
Well, I knew what an antenna was, and I knew what a transmitter was. So it helped a little bit, but everything was by the book. So it was a lot of Army speak in terms of the equipment that was new and different.
I see, but Morse code and any of those skills were not necessarily at the front of this training.
No, I think teletype was involved at some point, but that wasn't anything that I had done before.
What happened after that? Did you become a lawyer in the Chicago area?
Yeah, we moved back. We got married. I met Debbie my last year at Illinois, and we got married after my first year at Ohio State. She came over, transferred over, and after we both graduated, she was finishing her bachelor's when I got my law degree in 1972. We moved back to Chicago, and I started my legal career at that point, and we lived in an apartment. I got a little Yaesu FT101, and the landlord there gave me permission to put a vertical up on the roof, so I got started again a little bit on the radio. Were
you a DXer or a contester at that point?
I never thought that much about it, but I guess I was a DXer. I'd have to go back and look and see when I got my first DXCC certificate. And was dabbling in contests. Never did anything too serious until I got to Arizona, which was in 1981.
So you made a move to Arizona, or did you have a transfer?
I was in-house counsel for Motorola in Schaumburg, Illinois, and doing labor and employment law. I was traveling frequently to Phoenix and to Austin, and other points west for Motorola. The employment law function was still relatively new in the corporate law department, and they decided that it would make sense to have somebody full-time in Arizona. After discussing that with Debbie, we decided it would be a good move for us after a particularly bad winter in Chicago, shoveling snow off the roof and losing our little boys in the snowdrifts outside when they were playing. So 1981, we made the move to Arizona, and it was supposed to be 3 to 5 years and then back to the mothership, but I took the bar exam here, and we decided to stay.
Wow, and I bet it was quite an amazing change to go from 20 below to 120 above.
Yes, it was. In fact, the family, when we landed, I think we flew in or drove in August that year, and which is the hottest time of year. The good news is the house that we moved into had a swimming pool in back, and got the boys involved in swim lessons. I think probably the week after we got here, so that worked out. But we didn't miss the snow. We've never missed the snow. In fact, we were just back there and had to take heavy jackets because it was going to be down in the 40s and 50s when we were there.
Now, I understand that Motorola in the Phoenix area was a semiconductor manufacturing, right?
It was very big in semiconductors. They also had a big government electronics group, and there was some activity from their communications group that was involved in some of the two-way business. And as a corporate lawyer, I got involved in all of those. But semiconductor was huge. Yes, there were a number of plants here. They were the largest private employer in Arizona in 1981 with 26,000 employees. And that's the reason that they wanted me out here.
I didn't realize that it was so large.
Yep. Just a handful of people left today.
Obviously, if you're a ham, you were around a long time and you were converting Motorola taxi radios into ham radios. We knew a lot about Motorola Schaumburg, but we didn't think much about Motorola Phoenix. But 26,000 people is quite a lot of people.
Yep.
How did your ham radio life develop in the Phoenix area?
Well, I moved in and wanted to have, I thought, well, maybe I can finally have a tower or do something more. And so within the first few weeks of being here, I had a 2-meter radio in my car. And on the way home one day, I ran into, on 2 meters, on one of the repeaters, ND7B, never drink 7 beers. John, who, as it turned out, lived just like 2 blocks away from me and had a 40-foot tower in his backyard. And so he encouraged me to put up a similar tower. Didn't pay a whole lot of attention to any restrictions at that point. He hadn't had to worry about it. We had a Scottsdale address, but it was City of Phoenix for city services. So he helped me put up a 40-foot tower, put up a Cushcraft A4, and forget which radio I had at that point, but one of the Kenwoods, I think. And then he introduced me to the Scottsdale Amateur Radio Club, SARC, which was pretty big at that point, but was more of a general interest club. And then he took me to my first CADXA meeting, the Central Arizona DX Association, and that's where my peers in contesting and DXing were all hanging out, and got introduced to K5VT, and AA7A was there, and KC7V, N7CW. A lot of the guys that have made names for themselves in the hobby as DXers and contesters, and it's grown from there. I've stayed active with the Scottsdale Club for many years, but much more active with CADXA, and then with the Arizona Outlaws when they got started up about 10 years ago.
So it was really the association with the CADXA that kind of stimulated that interest in contesting and DXing in a big way? Yes,
we had some serious contesters and also guys that were going out on expeditions. I mean, K5VT, world famous for his de-expeditioning. He also had a very nice station in Phoenix and invited me over to operate. I operated sweepstakes from his station with some nice big antennas a couple of times, and so that that certainly got me going in a more serious contesting than I had done before.
Before we started recording, I had mentioned to you that I had been thinking earlier today, how do we get newbies into chasing DX and contesting? It seems to me that probably most people, when they're looking for a radio club, are looking for a club like Scottsdale, a club that has a local name, the General Radio Club. Are there a lot of DX associations? Maybe is there a way for these DX associations to do a better job of letting new hams know that they exist?
It's a good question, and I don't have a good answer for that. DXers are generally people who've been in the hobby for quite a few years, and it's an acquired taste in terms of how you want to spend your time operating. We have just a handful of younger members in CADXA now, and I think the best we can do is to go out and make presentations at the general interest clubs to try to pique interest and to invite them to participate. We're part of the Arizona Desert Airwaves, which is a monthly newsletter that all of the clubs in Arizona that want to have a monthly column. And so we're always announcing what programs we're having, and sometimes we'll attract some other people to come and try us out. But I think it takes somebody to be chasing DX for a while to be starting to look for a club that specializes in DXing or contesting, for that matter.
Well, there's been some conversation about young people liking the gaming side of chasing DX or contesting, and that might be a door into amateur radio for younger people who might not have an interest in ham radio otherwise.
Well, we've got Youth on the Air. YOTA has been gaining some traction here in the last few years. We've got some YOTA contests now that's really, I think, got started in Europe, but grabbed by a number of U.S. Folks as well to attract some younger people. We refer to YOTA as 25 or under. You qualify for a youth or young operator, I think is what they refer to them in Europe as. And there is a YOTA camp now that has been held the last couple of years in Cincinnati. I actually have a YOTA column in the National Contest Journal that I'm editing these days that talks about the activities. So there is that effort to involve young people in contesting in particular, and I think for those who try it, they seem to like it. I had my granddaughter with me for field day. She was here not this past June, but a year ago June, and had some fun operating. But to get someone to continue to participate or to get a license seems to be quite a challenge. I've got a grandson over in California as well who I've tried to interest, but he's more involved in destination imagination, where they invent things for different tasks that they're given in a competition, and doing things with electronics that go along with those projects. So it's, again, a challenge to attract interest into the hobby.
I want to take a minute to tell you about my favorite podcast, the Ham Radio Workbench Podcast, with George, KJ6VU, and now joined by Rod, VA30N, Mike, VA3MW, Mark, N6MTS, and Vince, VE6LK. Every 2 weeks, George and company offer up a status report on the many amateur radio projects on their workbenches and explore projects on their guests' workbenches. This group is project active and prolific, covering many technical areas of amateur radio. So the next time you want a deep dive into ham radio electronic project building, or to learn about technology, tools, test equipment, construction techniques, and the rest, listen to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast, available on every podcast player and channel. Use the link in this week's show notes page to get to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast directly. And now back to my QSO. You're also a member of the Voodoo Contest Club. What is that?
Well, the Voodoo Contest Group is not really active anymore, but starting with Roger Western, G3SXW, who left us about a year and a half ago, passed away, and Vince Thompson, K5ET, another silent key, along with several others, Mike Fulcher, KC7V, and Tony N7BG, who's got a different call these days, started this group that and Robbie GM3YTS was also one of the early ones, and they came up with the voodoo name after traveling to West Africa and going to sing at voodoo markets there in their travels. Started back in the early to mid 90s doing that. It wasn't until 1998 that I got invited to join them for the first time, and their mission or their goal was to go to a new West African country every 2 or 3 years, and to compete specifically in CQ Worldwide CW contest. These were all hardcore CW contest operators. So in 1998, I got my first invitation to join them, and I actually the first time I operated outside of the U.S. was in '88. I went to KP2A in the Virgin Islands and had a great time there. But '98 was when I got the invitation to go to Togo with the group. It was going to be their third year there, and a couple of the members decided they didn't want to go back to the same place again. So I got invited to join them and flew into Ghana, and then took a memorable bus ride across the border, the first of several bus rides across borders in West Africa. So the group would go to different countries, and I still amaze people when I tell them I was to West Africa, I think 8 times, and never saw a lion or tiger or elephant, because we would spend our time setting up the radio station and get ready for the contest, and occasionally did some sightseeing, but never got to see any of the wildlife. But tremendous memories. I've written several articles about my travels there, and spent some time in Mali and Liberia, Burkina Faso, and it was always very memorable in terms of how lucky we are living where we do and having what we have, how spoiled we are when you go to these places and see how they are just existing, but happy for the most part with what they have, which is much less than we enjoy here.
Yeah, there's nothing like international travel to give one a different perspective.
That's absolutely true. And the first time going in, the first sense that you have is of smoke in the air. You land in the evening, and what you smell are the wood-burning fires for people cooking their dinner. And so having wood is critical for that purpose. Seeing the marketplaces that they have, where people are trying to sell their wares to make enough to buy the wood or to buy food for their next meal. So yes, it makes a very strong impression, and I think everybody should have the opportunity to see how other people live in other parts of the world. It makes you think a lot more about the gifts that you experience here.
What do you think from a ham radio point of view? What's the most important lesson you've learned on those trips to West Africa?
Well, every trip is like a field day squared. It gives you an appreciation for how well prepared you need to be for any kind of travel if you're going to put an expedition on the air. And it's always annoying to see the cheap shots that people will take at expeditions for not being on the frequency that they want at the particular time, or not being the best operator around, but not realizing how it sounds on the other end with 1,000 stations trying to work you at the same time. So the lessons are to be prepared. There's no Radio Shack. Well, we don't have Radio Shack here anymore either, but there's no Amazon isn't going to deliver the part you need. And so you need to take enough along for backup to make sure you can get the station working. We were pretty lucky because the Voodoo's had accumulated some gear, and so we would we would rent a bus typically and travel across borders, taking radios and amplifiers. We had a collection of alpha amplifiers, coax, and the other pieces with us. Things almost always were not working and had to be repaired when we got to the next location. But we would always bring more supplies with to try and replenish what we were doing. But so when you see when these expeditions going out now are stocking a container that's going on a ship and trying to package everything ahead of time and practicing putting things together, it's all that preparation that makes a difference in the success of an expedition, that whether it's just to work DXers or to put up a good score in a contest.
Now, do you yourself still go on maybe simpler DXpeditions or, suitcase DXpeditions? And if you do, have you mastered packing what you need to take?
These days, in fact, this November I'm going back to PJ2T in Curacao. I'm a member of the Caribbean Contest Consortium, which is PJ2T. It'll be my fourth trip there. So it is very simple to take a suitcase and maybe your paddles and headphones. Everything else is there. But no, I think every time you go, it's a little bit different in terms of what you need. Some of the Voodoos have went to Suriname a few times, but there again, there was an existing station, so it's a lot easier if you're going someplace with an existing station rather than taking everything yourself, and that's very different forms of packing. You
say on your QRZ page that you're a QSL manager. What is a QSL manager, and what kind of responsibility is that for you?
Well, QSL manager means that you have the logs for somebody who's operated generally on a DXpedition, but some big contest stations in North America will have managers also to respond to QSL requests that are received. And I mean, QSLing is a whole topic by itself these days, because with Logbook of the World, the volume of QSLs has gone down substantially. But as a manager, you're responsible for responding to QSL cards that come in. Our group just operated in the Arizona QSO party recently. We made over 2,000 contacts. I've gotten, I think, 15 QSL card requests. We had a special call sign of N7A for that. And so I get the card in. It's almost always with the self-addressed stamped envelope, which is what is expected. I have a card for N7A that I'll put in that return envelope with the QSL confirmation data, and mail it back to the person who's asking for it. It's much easier these days to do QSLing electronically using Logbook of the World, and that's how most of my confirmations are done these days. But QSL managers are still around, and for any expedition, there's that opportunity for the expeditioner to have somebody, a friend, or somebody who does managing full-time to handle the cards for them. What's required is to have QSL cards printed up that have that call sign on it that the person wants to confirm, usually for a new country or a new grid square, and have the log information to be able to fill out the card. A lot of it is also done electronically through a system on Club Log, which is another great resource for DXers or anybody that is chasing awards. Club Log has OQRS, which is online QSL system. I don't remember exactly what the acronym is, but OQRS allows you to actually, instead of sending money, which is occasionally required for, or usually required for DX station for return postage, a couple of dollars, you can do that electronically with PayPal, and makes a QSL manager's job a whole lot easier. So things have evolved like everything else in ham radio these days. That's seems to be the way a lot of QSLing gets done.
What does it cost to mail a QSL card in America now?
A little bit more than $1, and I can't tell you the exact amount. I don't know right offhand.
Big money.
Well, yeah, plus the cost of the card. I request $2 to return an international card these days.
Oh, that's pretty amazing. I've got a couple of QSL cards. I'm drop Pony Express in America when I have a chance, but I had no idea what the postage might be. Do QSL bureaus still exist?
Yes, they do. In fact, I just got about 50 cards from the W7 Bureau here a few days ago. Not as much activity. I mean, again, not as many cards are going through bureaus, and that's gotten more expensive as well. ARRL continues to run the main bureau for the United States, and so each of the call areas has a bureau. It's staffed by volunteers, and you have to have money at the bureau for your call sign, so that when cards come in, they have money for postage to mail the cards to you. A lot of active stations now are putting on their QRZ page that they will not answer bureau cards because of the expense that's involved. The cost of mailing a package of 100 cards or 200 cards can be $8 or $10 or $15, depending on the weight, based on what ARRL charges for the outgoing bureau, and then the cost of the postage itself. So there are hams in a few countries that still seem to want to confirm everything on paper, but I think that's going away bit by bit.
We will return to our guests in just a moment. Nuts and Bolts Magazine is a new sponsor and is an amazing resource for new and old hams alike. Click on the banner to get your online or paper subscription of Nuts and Bolts. A new way to show your support of the QSO Today podcast is to buy me a coffee. I consume gallons of coffee to create this weekly podcast. Invite me for coffee by pushing the yellow button, Buy Me a Coffee, on the QSO Today show notes page. And now back to our QSO Today. One of the things that I discovered in our conversation and our emails going back and forth and looking at your QRZ page is that you also operate a remotely controlled station. And when I was doing a little bit of digging, I discovered that the remotely controlled station that you're operating is the Milt Jensen N5IA Memorial Station. I remember Milt from the 70s on Cactus Radio Network. Milt sadly passed away in a tower accident in 2016. Can you talk a little bit about your involvement with this station and I think what its history might be?
Sure. Milt, we were aware that Milt was building this amazing 160 station. He loved top band, 160 meters, 1.8 megahertz, the lowest frequency that most hams use, although there's some LF work well below that these days. But Milt spent years with one of his friends in across the border in Verdun, New Mexico, actually building a first 160 contest station there with his friend, and then buying property across the border in Safford, Arizona, southeastern Arizona, in Graham County, and spent several years constructing this 8-circle with 8 130-foot verticals that are made out of something like Roan 25, with an extensive radial field that is very impressively soldered in a grid that would amaze anybody just looking at it. And had gotten it going on the air, and he would write detailed reports of his activity in the 160 contests, and was really an expert on propagation, and then operated 160 on a couple of expeditions going outside of the U.S. Loved the band. So in January of 2016, the CQ Worldwide 160 contest was coming up. Milt has a large family, and he and his wife were going up, I believe, to Wyoming to visit one of the sons and his family the weekend of CQ 160. So he wanted somebody to operate the station. He was operating it remotely from Verdun, would travel over to operate in person occasionally, and the station was located in a school bus on this property that he had purchased. He had taken the seats out and put some tables in the school bus, and had it set up with an Elecraft K3, and he had an Alpha that was dedicated to 160, the camera so you could see what power it was putting out, but operated remotely. So anyway, he wanted somebody to operate the station, and at that point, some of the Arizona outlaws were getting together for breakfast on Wednesday mornings in Phoenix, and he got the word up to Bob, K8IA, that he wanted somebody to operate. And so at breakfast, Bob says, "Hey, Milt wants someone to operate. Who wants to do it?" And there's 6 or 8 of us there, and for whatever reason, people are looking at me. And I said, "Oh, well, okay." I had never operated remotely, and got in touch with Milt. He started schooling me on what was going to be involved. Sent me the remote rig RRC 1258 unit, the little black box that's the interface between the control radio in your home shack and the remote radio at the remote site. I had operated very little on 160. I had only made barely. Let's see. I don't know. I think I just made it to 100 countries after about 20 years, and it only worked Europe maybe half a dozen times, because from the West Coast it's extremely hard to hear European stations from Arizona. But he said, "No, you'll have some fun with it," and got me set up. I got the station working with the remote, and the first night before the contest, I wanted to do some testing with it. Got on and might have heard one Hungarian station, but mostly a couple of South Americans and nothing much. But 160 is a fickle band, and you get these spotlight openings. And so a night or two later, we had one of those spotlight openings, and I'm sitting here, and I have a log sheet that shows 100 European stations being worked in a little less than 2 hours on 160 CW. This is before FT8 even was a thing. So I, of course, couldn't believe it, and Milt says to me in an email the next day, "Why didn't you go split?" Meaning, why wasn't I telling people up 1 or up 2? Well, I had never had a pile up on 160 before. So I said, well, the next time I'll remember that, Milt. So anyway, I got my buddy Fred, NA2U, to operate the contest with me, because it's an all-nighter, and I didn't want to go all night. And Fred was excited. He said, boy, it's like being a kid in a candy shop by having this antenna to use, because you can point it with a click on the computer screen. You can point it in any one of 8 directions, and it's just amazing. So we operated. We came in, I think, number 1 in Zone 3. Great score. Milt up in Wyoming is listening to us on another remote station, and was really impressed with what we had done. So afterwards he says, well, if you like, you can keep doing some operating when I'm not using the station. So great. All right, so that's January, and in June I was on vacation in Israel with my family when I got the news that Milt had his tower accident, which was a shock to everybody in the Outlaws and anybody who knew him. So I didn't know what was going to happen to the station after that, and I had actually wrote a story about operating the contest that Milt had helped me do some editing on before I'd left on vacation, and was going to appear in the National Contest Journal. So when I got back, I sent a condolence card to the family and sent a copy of the article, and through a couple of emails, heard back from Rulene, Milt's wife, that they wanted to keep the station going as Milt's legacy. Was I interested in doing that? And I, first of all, was surprised that they would ask me to do that. But this is my best example, I guess, of making a good first impression. And Milt must have said some nice things, because I agreed, but I knew that I could not do it because of the technology involved. And so I recruited my good friend and technical guru Ned Stearns, AA7A, asking Ned if he would want to participate in getting this, keeping this station going. And Ned, who was chasing the 3,000 mark in DXCC Challenge, thought this would be a great opportunity to add to his 160 totals, and said, okay. So in August of 16, we met Rulene at the school bus, got our first look at it, and as we say, the rest is history. 6 years later, Ned and I have made about 80 trips. It's 175 miles from Phoenix to Safford. Ned has rebuilt a good part of the infrastructure out there, although the 8th Circle is still standing and still doing its thing. along with a beverage farm that gives us 16 directions for listening on diversity receive. We've operated every 160 contest we can get on and have had amazing results keeping Milt's memory alive. And have added to the station. He had also built a 80-meter Foursquare out there. That's amazing. Also works on 60 meters, we discovered. And we've added HF capability with some nice tri-banders and now have a beautiful two-element 40-meter beam Yagi up at 80 feet. So it's a very competitive contest station, and we are hoping to keep it going. And our QSL card, we got the call sign NA7TB, NA7 top band, and as part of the Milt Johnson Memorial Station. So that's how it developed, and still going strong.
How is that station? It's pretty rural. I was looking at the satellite pictures of it on QRZ. How are you connecting to the internet from that station?
We use these remote rig boxes, and we have a dedicated internet connection. Milt's son works for the internet company, so we have an in there. We pay for a dedicated business subscription monthly, but it is, if the speed is good enough there, and each of us have done what we need with Cox up here with internet speed, so that isn't an issue.
I guess what I was asking, Lee, was it looks pretty rural. Is the site served with microwave, or is it served actually with a VDSL or something like that?
It is. They've got microwave shots for the high-speed internet down there. So.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So it is rural, and it's outside. It's south of Safford, and it's rugged terrain. I mean, we go out there. It's a couple thousand feet, I think, higher than Phoenix, and we feel it after being out there, walking around trying to check the beverage connections, and you wear yourself out in a hurry.
Good exercise. It's
in the shadow of Mount Graham, which is a beautiful mountain with telescopes up on top. That's just to the west of us, and so it's also kind of refreshing to be away from the city and just enjoying the view.
Now, you said earlier before we started that you're no longer operating in the school bus.
Darren Jensen, Milt's son, one of his sons, has been living on the property now. He works for the internet company, and we agreed we would help him invest in a prefab building that's, I want to say, like 12 by 24, and he's got 2/3 of it for his office, his telecommute office, and we've got 1/3 of it for our equipment racks. And that is, we call it our rackification project. We got everything in these really nice racks now. And we've got actually 3 stations out there these days.
And what kind of equipment are you running out there?
We have they're K3s, and we've got a variety of amplifiers, and that's it. It's pretty basic in terms of the equipment. What is your current rig at your house? I'm an Elecraft guy. I've got the home station is a K3 KPA 500. I've also got an Alpha 87A that I use to chase the rare ones, but don't use it very much anymore. And 55-foot tower out and back that has a stepper with a 40-meter trombone on it. And I've just upgraded my 6-meter. I've gotten into 6 meters big time in the last few years, chasing the Fred Fish Memorial Award with 488 grid squares, getting very close to the end here. So I've got an 8-element 6-meter up that I use here, and that's it. I use the home station a little, but operate using the remote most of the time when I'm on the air. A noise floor is much better, much lower there? Yes, you can actually see a noise floor instead of just noise, which I have. I've got S7 to 8 noise on the home station these days, especially on the higher bands. So, yeah, it's more like S2 out there. Well, it sounds like that's quite amazing. Are you able to operate multiple stations at the same time remotely? We've got 2 stations, and we're just really doing more of that now. We've got a second tower out there with tri-bander on it and 40-meter Foursquare that allows us to use 2 stations. We used 2 stations in the CQ Worldwide RTTY and did pretty well with that. We've had to add some filtering. We actually blew out the front end on one of the K3s a year ago in the RTTY contest, but no problems this year with the new filtering that we got from VA6. I can't think of his call sign now, but excellent filters that we've installed. So yeah, 2 stations. We're going to do that again actually this weekend. CQ Worldwide Phone. We're going to have at least a second multiplier station going in addition to the run station.
What do you think the greatest challenge is facing amateur radio now?
I think addressing the advances in technology, trying to keep up with the technology. The WSJTX and its ilk have changed the way people participate in ham radio very, very dramatically. And there has to be a reckoning in terms of frequency usage of how we're going to adapt to the thousands of people that are active now on FT8, FT4, and other digital modes. And concern is that it's going to take away from the traditional modes and maybe be harmful in some ways in the usage of our frequencies. So I think that's the biggest challenge, as well as just the age challenge, the aging out of our hobby, and getting more young folks in one way or another.
What excites you the most by what's happening in ham radio now?
Well, at the same time it's a challenge. I think the weak signal capabilities of the digital modes is exciting. I've been participating a little bit in EME work using the 6-meter antenna out at the remote site, and with JT65 that is being used these days. You can do some amazing things on moon bounce just without elevation, just the first 20 degrees of moon rise or moon set. Working stations, usually larger antenna stations, but with a single Yagi. I worked from Arizona into Europe a few times, and South Africa once. So that's pretty exciting, and that's strictly because of the new advances in the digital technology. So I just think there's a lot of opportunities for being inventive and taking the hobby to new places, and really taking advantage of the skills and ideas that a lot of hams have.
What advice would you give to new or returning hams to the hobby?
Wow, to new hams, it's still a wonderful place to meet people. It's a hobby that is open to everyone and pretty much everywhere. It's an opportunity to get to know people and learn about how other people live. To get to know people's families, to go visit people. We had went on a cruise that Ned and I took with our wives a few years ago. We got to visit with Robbie GM3YTS when the British Isles cruise stopped in Edinburgh. We drove and got to meet Robbie, who we had gotten to know as voodoods in West Africa, but got to see his local village and his home station, and I've got relationships with a number of others. John G4IRN is another one who has become a very good friend. We've operated together, but met through the radio. And so, if you get involved in a local club, you can make a lot of friends. You can go out on field day in June and learn some operating skills and just meet more people. So it's a great way to get to know people and to learn things. I've still not being an engineer, being more of the appliance operator, I've picked up an awful lot of knowledge about antenna building and construction stuff that has served me well through the years, and that's all thanks to this wonderful hobby of ours.
Lee, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. I really appreciate the idea of being able to operate a remote control station without any noise. I'm certain that most of the listeners here that live in urban areas would also appreciate this. So thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast.
It's been my pleasure. 73.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Lee. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in KY7M in the search box at the top of the page. My thanks to ICOM America for their continued support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of this fine sponsor by clicking on their link in the show notes pages. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any of the other episodes into written text, click on the transcribe button at the top of the show notes page. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes page. By using the Amazon link on the home page before you shop at Amazon allows Amazon to send us a small commission on what you purchase that further keeps our QSO Today project going. I am grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference as we work towards episode 500. QSO Today is now available on a large number of podcast players and now a host of podcast services and applications. We are Podcast 2.0 compatible. I now use the Fountain podcast player to listen to all of my favorite podcasts. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.